we're rejoicing, we're glad in it, we're glad you're here. And there we go. We can start now. The girls are here. Yes. Hi, guys. So on your handout, I gave you Matthew chapter 11, and we spent numerous weeks studying on how to study the Bible. And so this is kind of a wonderful example of kind of what I see when I study the Word of God, kind of the questions I ask and the things that I'm looking for as I study. And it just basically says, "Come unto me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I'll give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." I had a phone call this week. You know how when you get a call and you look and we don't really have caller ID like we used to in the old days, but it said Massachusetts. And I'm like, oh, wonderful, I bet it's a political poll. Yeah, so I answered it for absolutely no idea why. And it was a roommate that I had when I was in Bible college back in Chicago. And he was there 1 year. And then he went to Pensacola for a year, Christian college, I don't know, anyway. And his name was Brian. And I have not heard from him since our freshman year at Bible college. I was in 81. And so, that was a couple of years ago. And it's funny because I didn't recognize his voice. So he told me who he was, and I immediately remembered. And what I remembered most about Brian was since he was from Boston, we would sit around and talk about the difference in words. Like you wear blue jeans, they wear dungarees. And we compared, and like pop and soda. I mean, it's like two different languages basically. And I enjoyed Brian, and he had a lot of growing up to do spiritually. He had a lot of growing up to do emotionally, and so he told me that about his life and about the struggles he'd had and the storms of life and the decisions and the repercussions, and then I said, so why are you calling me? I'm still curious how he got my phone number. And he laughed. He goes, I'm involved in a men's Bible study at my church. And he said, our assignment this week was to hunt down someone from our past that encouraged us when we were in a really dark time. And he says, when I was in Bible school, he said, I wasn't ready for that. And he was very open and honest about, and he laughed, he goes, and he said, you were the one guy I was sure was going to end up being a pastor. And he said, you were kind of like the person that I could watch that was just going to be faithful. And I didn't tell him about all the storms of life that I too had walked through. That was for another day. But as we were talking, this verse kept coming to mind. Because, God he was in a, can you imagine being in a place in your life where the storms of life are about to wash over you, where you honestly feel like you're not going to make it, you're struggling in every aspect. And so what does God do? He puts you in a Bible college. You would think that would be a very safe place, but we had over 300 pages of rules at that Bible college. They loved the rules, and Brian was choking on the big rule book, and that was a problem for him. But he told me, he goes, he said, we go back to our dorm, and he said, you were always there. He said, you knew where you were going to go, you knew what God wanted you to do, and he said, I needed that. And he said, you were the one person that the Spirit brought to my mind that I needed to thank, because he said, over the years, I always wondered. He said, over the years, so anyway, somehow he ended up with my phone number, and he called, and we had this moment of fellowship on Thursday. He gave me a call, and this verse kept coming to mind the whole time he was talking, because no matter how difficult life was, no matter what he was going through, no matter what repercussions he was dealing with, God never forgot him. God always was bringing him back on point, no matter what was happening. And he kept laughing. He'd say, there was no way God was ever going to use me in any way. I had made too many mistakes, but God kept bringing him back on point. And he made me promise before he hung up that I would tell you this story this morning. This was important to him. He said, I want to be able to go back to my men's group and tell them I did what they asked me to do this week. And that brought this to mind. And I believe that sometimes God allows me to experience things, teaches me things that he wants me to share with you guys. And so that's where we're at in this, because I just wanted to take this a little bit of time this morning and talk about this passage, because this is like, I think I could write a whole volume of commentary just on this one verse, because it's one of the things that I want you to notice is the very first word is just come. And I love that because Jesus was inviting people to come to him. I'm afraid that often in Christianity, it's more of a push, it's more of a go. One of the things I've learned I've been taking grief counseling classes for years. I got a whole library full of books I've read. And one of the things they've taught us about grief counseling is you don't lead people through grief. Because every single soul on earth moves through grief at a different pace. And each one of them has their own thing they're struggling with, and each one of them has their own issues, and it takes a different amount of time for each person. So you can't lead them through grief, and you don't want to get behind them and push them through grief, and there's no agenda, there's no steps, there's no plan, because everybody moves at the pace that they need to move toward this point of healing. And so we call it companionship. That's where you come alongside somebody in grief, and you progress with them as they need to progress. And when they need to stop, then you stop with them. And when they're ready to share, then you're there to listen, you're there to love, you're there to be non-judgmental. There's no agenda, there's no timetable. And that is the spirit of companioning somebody in grief. And what's important, I think, with this is I think that is a beautiful picture of what Jesus does with each one of us. He meets us where we are, and he is willing to come alongside of us. And what does he do? As he comes alongside of us, he helps us pull. He helps us move. And as we get to a point where we need to stop, and we get to a point where we're our faith needs to grow and needs to catch up with where we're at, we're dealing with something in our heart, and we need time to wrap our head around it, he's not pushing us. He says, come to me, I'm going to hook up into the yoke with you, and we will progress through life together. And that's why the verse, taste and see that the Lord is good, keeps coming to mind every time I read this, because Jesus is not trying to drag us along faster. He's not trying to drag us into a bunch of ceremonies and rituals, and he's not trying to move us into something that isn't authentic. He wants us to be honest. So as all I was doing, I just made a couple brief notes here. I think and you've heard me use this illustration, but I think it's absolutely perfect in this scenario. Is where everybody that's born, everybody when they're born has a God-shaped hole in their heart. And only God can fill that hole. It's like we have a desire, a thirst for God when we're born. And what's ironic is as we move through life, we find 10,000 other things to try and fit in that hole. I mean, it just doesn't work, but the world offers us so many things to put in this hole in our heart that will fill that need. Why? Because we're humans, and that whole human thing is a real problem for us. Because God created us to be restless. He created us to desire him, to seek him, to be still in his presence. And there is nothing more unnatural for Pastor Shane than to be still in the presence of God. Because that whole being still and being silent is an issue for me. And so for me to actually not work is a problem for me, Cal. For me not to be moving, it's funny, because I actually went to a funeral where I wasn't officiating recently. And you know how uncomfortable that was? This is just awful. I'm like, man, I need to be doing something. Instead of just sitting here experiencing grief, experiencing the journey, experiencing mourning as a group, I'm like, this is just wrong. Yeah, not move. Here, this whole passage, I want you to get that mental picture of Jesus coming along, and I love the word, here they use the word yoke, which is very common in that Palestine at that time. But for me, I use the word companioning, coming alongside. When back in them days when they would hook a yoke up, they would have rough soil, hard soil, clay type soil with a lot of rocks in it, or a lot of thistles, or clay with a lot of things in it that's a problem. And so if you go to pull it yourself, I can pull through some of that tough stuff. I mean, I'm just stubborn enough that I can get quite a ways down the road, and then at some point I'm just going to burn out. My self-discipline wears thin. It's kind of like being on a diet. I can go for a ways, like, sometimes 7 or 8 minutes before, coming to me, all you who are laboring. Here's the deal. I think the heart of this, the spirit of this is each one of us go somewhere when the storms of life are buffeting. When we're shrouded. By the way, talk about Rita for just a second. When Rita knew that her death was imminent, when she knew that she was down to her last couple weeks, she knew that her time on earth was short. She was excited about the folks she was going to get to see. She was going to get to meet Jesus, and she had all these things that she was so excited about. But when she got to a point where she knew that she had a sense of fear in her heart, that she was honest enough that she called and said, "You and I need to talk." And so when we sat down, what is she doing? She is choosing who to reach out to. And what am I doing? All I'm doing is mirroring her back to Jesus. And I think she was trusting that I would do that. When the storms of life are buffeting, Jesus is saying, listen, you are going to go somewhere for your strength. And by the way, in the Bible, in the Old Testament, they use the word idle a lot. The only thing we use idle for today is what you do with your car when the engine is idling, right? That's not what it's talking about. In the Old Testament, it talked about idols. The best way that I know to describe the word idle or define it is anywhere that you go for strength, joy, peace, comfort, hope, anywhere that you go to fulfill all those things that God-shaped spot in your heart God should be filling, anywhere else you go for that satisfaction, for that peace, anywhere you go for that stuff. I think in America today, and I'm talking about grief some today because it fits so well with this companioning model here in this passage, is that often I do a lot of services. And one of the things I've learned is I have had families tell me, not one or two, I've had hundreds tell me, listen, keep it short because we're going to go back to work when it's over. I understand, because the longer they're not working, the longer they're silent, the longer they're still, the more they have to travel through grief. And that's not pleasant. They believe that the busier they are, the more active they are, the more they keep their mind and their heart occupied, they're not going to have to deal with their grief. And so, listen, if you get the service over by noon, I can be at work by 1, and I just kind of continue on with my week. Because they're trying to avoid dealing with what's going on in their heart. I think people often do that with their spiritual needs. Often we find so many things to put in that whole thing in our heart that should be filled with God. We find 10, I'll tell you where, for me, the lines get really fuzzy. To where things get difficult is when they begin to start putting good things in there, maybe even religious things, in that hole in their heart, trying to fill that need they have for God, where God says, seek me and you'll find me. And so God's saying, listen, I'm here, I'm not going anywhere. And we choose to put religious things in that hole in our heart, trying to make us feel like we're not substituting a cheap imitation for the authentic God. It's important. I mean, it's a good thing. And anyways, we have to choose where we go when our heart is hurting, when we need answers, when we are seeking God. We have to choose whether we're going to go to Jesus or whether we're going to find a distraction. And I think that is really important here. Another thing I gave you, it's only when we realize our souls are restless that we begin to accept God's invitation into his rest. Your pastor is not throwing stones in any way. If there is one person in this room that struggles with this, from the time I was a young pastor, from the time, I think I was a pastor at the church in Arden. I was 19 or 20. I was a kid. I knew nothing. I knew less than nothing. And one of the things that always confused me from that time, pretty much till today, is what do pastors do with Sabbath? I bet I've read 500 books written by pastors and theologians on what pastors are supposed to do for the Sabbath, the day of rest. Why? Because Sundays is by far the pastor's busiest day, right? Sundays we work hard. I mean, and when church is over, I've usually got a number of people that I'm going to counsel, or people that are hurting, people that need to spend some time with. And by the time I get home, it's usually after 2, and then on Saturdays, usually I either have a funeral or a wedding, and by the time I get going, and then, so this whole thing of Sabbath, rest, being still before God, has always puzzled me. It's always been something that, oh, yeah.
Well, Sabbath's on Saturday.
Except that's usually when we do funerals and most weddings. And usually I do, there's services I'm officiating just about. This coming Saturday, I've got a vet honor guard thing we're doing on Saturday in down Sedonia.
What do the priests in the temple do on the Sabbath? Do they still offer their sacrifices?
This is a great problem, because I've read extensively on rest. And one of the things that this is me, okay? And I'm not telling you that this is perfect for everybody or anybody. Here's where my heart is. My heart is every single day for me is Sabbath. Every day, 7 days a week. That doesn't mean that I'm going to unplug for 24 hours and do, and just spend, no. Every single day that I go into, I view as a Sabbath. 7 days a week. And I want, first off, and by the way, this isn't in my notes, I didn't think about this till right now. This is where I've grown to over the years. I believe that no one day is more holy to me than another day. And so every single day I need to be in a spirit that is devoted to God. I should not be participating in anything during that day that moves my heart or my mind away from God. I want him to be welcome to walk into any situation, thought process, activity, decision, whatever I'm doing every single day. I want God to be invited, and throughout that day, I have periods of time where I am focused solely on him without distractions. And for me personally, I find that it is most effective for me, and by the way, this is not when I'm studying for a sermon. Okay, this is not a time where I'm opening my Bible and I got a notepad out and I got a commentary. And no, this is not studying for a sermon. This is where it's me and God. I am sitting down with a friend that sticks closer than a brother, somebody that knows me intimately. This is someone where I just need to be still and be honest. And so every single day, I spend time throughout my day, and this isn't where it's on a schedule necessarily, because as God opens these doors, I need to be available to him.
Sure.
And it's ironic, because I find that the more I do this, the more opportunities he gives me to serve. I told you about this a couple weeks ago, but it's one of those moments that I'm still processing. I have a wonderful guy that frankly, I draw his blood. He comes in, he's dying of cancer. He's chosen not to do the treatment. And so he comes in, nice guy, he's had an incredible life. And so he comes in, he sits down on my little chair, and I draw him regularly. Every 2 weeks I draw him, because we're watching the progression. And so 2 weeks ago, on a Friday, he comes in, he sits down, and he sees on my name tag, my badge, I got a little cross on there. He made some comment, and I laughed. I said, I'm a pastor. And he goes, I don't know if I buy that. I said, yeah, I really am. Been doing it. No. He said, not you. He says, I said, I don't understand the whole God thing. And so I'm like, all right, just throw chum to a shark, Yeah, okay. Well, I told him, I said, let me talk about it. And so immediately, I promise, he starts talking about his experience in churches and about how he'd been hurt and his family had been hurt. And he goes, finally he gets all done and he winds down. And I said, here's the problem. I said, you're not talking about God, you're talking about man. I said, you're looking at man. I said, I want to take 2 minutes and talk about God. Okay? And he's pretty open-minded. He goes, okay. And at this point, I realize my time's up. My next patient should be here. And my receptionist sticks her head in the door and says, by the way, your next 2 patients have canceled. I'm back on the clock. So for the next 30 minutes, we talked about God. I said, let me tell you what I know about God. I said, let me tell you who he is and what he is like. And I told him, I said, I do not want you to weigh that against the Christians that you have experienced. I want you to weigh that against God. I said, you're at a place in your life where, I said, in the very near future, you're going to stand in front of him, and you're going to stand there, and I says, I said, you need to come to a place to where you are friend of his, where you experience his love, you experience his forgiveness, and so we've had spent 30 minutes talking, and as he's getting up to leave, he says, we'll do this again in 2 weeks. You know where I'm going to be? Yeah. And I want to be a medium. I want to be a bridge that moves people closer to God in every aspect. So here's what happened. So I address him. So what is the first thing that hits my mind? So then my next customer comes along, I take care of them, and then I have a window of time here where I'm supposed to be processing, and I immediately have about 20 minutes to where I have nothing in my heart but gratitude for the window that God had just opened. For 20 minutes, all I'm doing is I am thanking God for the opportunity of preparing that guy's heart, for putting him in my chair, for preparing my heart to where I'm actually paying attention to what opportunity is in front of me. And for 20 minutes, I have nothing but a moment of rest and gratitude, and all of a sudden that light shines brighter.
Yeah.
And you know what I find? I find that as I am consistent in doing this, and I'm consistent in moving people closer to Jesus, now I don't know if the opportunities increase or I just become more aware of those opportunities, whatever it is, that as you are consistent to whom much is given, much is required, and I find that God has given me much, and as I'm being faithful, and I think one of the greatest abilities is availability. And all of a sudden I'm available, and my eyes are open for God to do it. So come. When people come, I want to direct them to Jesus, because I realize that he is a great physician. He is the one that heals. I've talked to 2 different people this week about with Jesus reaching out to people that are sinners. Jesus reaching out to people that are broken and damaged and struggling. That's why I put this at the top. That was why we started here. The Lord's close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. The Bible teaches, Jesus taught us that he didn't come to heal the sick. He came to what? Yeah, whether Luke 19:10, he came to seek and save that which are lost. Yeah, this is powerful. This is important. So on your little handout there, I gave you step 1. When you and I are working with people, or maybe in our own hearts, the first thing we need to do is recognize when we are weary and we're burdened. And by the way, I gave you a little qualification under this because I think there's a physical application and a spiritual application here. But I am pretty sure that I gave you the weary by definition is I'm just working nonstop. I'm never slowing down. I'm exhausted. I'm burning out. Heavy laden. There are things in my life that's out of control. There are things in my life I'm trying to control that I can't control. And I become heavy laden when I am trying to handle things that are not mine to handle. And God is basically saying here in this passage, he says, listen, when you have become, by the way, as a pastor, one of the things that I have learned is when I get like this, when I find myself getting weary and I find myself being worn down, I am 100% sure that I am trying to control things that are not mine to control. I had an old pastor one time sitting in a service, and he cornered me afterward, and he said, I've noticed something about you. He said, when you are doing it on your own strength, you tell more stories or you sing more. He says, when your heart is right and you spent time with God this week, and he said, you're dialed in and you and God are in lockstep, he said, you'll still tell the stories, but he said, they're driving home the scriptures. I never forgot him telling that, because when I find that I'm getting a sense of burnout, when I'm getting a sense of weary, when things are heavy on my shoulders and I'm starting to carry things that are not mine to carry, I recognize that I have lost focus of who God is. I've lost focus of the fact that it's not all about me and it's all about him, and that I need to recalibrate, I need to zero my heart. I need to take time out. I need to take a time out and spend time with God. I gave you James because I think this ties it in well. God resists the proud, gives grace to the humble. He gives what? The proud. When I am trying to control and direct things that are not mine to direct and control, when I'm humble, I am actually directing people back to God. I'm not directing them to me. It says, therefore, submit to God. Underline the word submit. Resist the devil, he will flee from you, and then what? Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. So what does our text say? Come to me. And God's saying what? Draw near to God. These are principles that you and I need to hang on to tightly, because when we begin to experience exhaustion, when we begin to recognize we're rubbing up against things that we can't control, that have the propensity to burn us in a place that we don't know how to heal, and it will influence us in things that we absolutely are out of answers, that is when I recognize that I just need to be still and draw close to God. I love that. Now, flip your little paper over. It's just right in the middle of the word rest. Rest. I love that. One of my favorite illustrations for rest. In my mind, when I think of rest, by the way, the rest here is not going on vacation and laying on a beach somewhere. The rest here, the flavor of this, usually in the Bible, it's in the midst of conflict, in the midst of battle, in the midst of something that is very threatening, that all of a sudden you're able to take a R&R, you're able to take a time out, in my mental picture of this, I saw an illustration of this one time in a White Rapids kayaker. This guy is in some White Rapids, and he is obviously a very skilled kayaker. I would have drowned 4 or 5 times if I was in that water. And so he's in this terrible water. He's trying to make headway, and as he's going, he's just getting buffeted, and he's getting hammered, and it seems like it's out of control. And he is working hard. He's exhausted, and there's a huge boulder up ahead, and he pulls in behind this boulder with his kayak, and the nose of his kayak is resting up against this rock. And then as it rests there, he takes a drink of water, he gets out, takes a bite of granola, he's all what? He is resting. In the midst of the stream that has threatened to overturn his kayak, he is taking a moment to rest, recharge, get some water. He's doing what he needs to do to prepare for the next leg of the river. I love that mental picture, because I see myself coming up behind the boulder. I see me stopping and saying, all right, God, it's you and me. Teach me, recharge me, make changes to me. Father, I am an open book in every regard. Whatever it is that you want to do, whatever it is needs to be done, I am just nosing in behind this rock, and I don't miss the fact that I'm nosing in behind the rock, which is Jesus. Yeah, nosing in, and I'm finding rest in the midst of a very busy, threatening environment. I love that. Finding rest. I gave you Psalm 127:2. It's vain to rise up early, to sit up late, to eat the bread of sorrows. Why? For he gives his beloved sleep. I gave you that for a reason. Not only do I find it incredibly ironic, since I'm not a very good sleeper, sleep is just kind of not my thing. Here, he's saying, listen, I will calm your soul. Listen, if you're finding yourself at a place where you're struggling with your sleep, you're finding yourself where you're anxious, you are struggling, you need to spend more time with me. Find your rest in me. Lay these things at my feet. Allow me, whatever's causing you anxiety, pray about it. Whatever's causing you threats, pray about it. Bring it back to God. Leave it at his feet. Recognize there are things that are out of my control. What was the second one I gave you? Philippians 4, be anxious for nothing. By the way, this is by far one of the most difficult passages in all the Bible. Very simple, very direct, almost doesn't need a sermon to illustrate it, but the facts of it run so deep, it's an amazing verse to meditate on. Be anxious for nothing. That one bite. What is there that I'm anxious about? What is there in my life that is bringing me to a place to where I'm starting to lose sleep, to where I'm starting to struggle, to where I'm wanting in that bag of chocolates, find a little comfort food action there. And so what is there that's causing me anxiety? And my first question is, why have I not laid it at the feet of Jesus? Why am I not taking it to him in prayer and asking him to provide me the rest that he needs? I'm going to give you one illustration for this, and I'll let it go. I counseled a guy one time on forgiveness. He had fair reason to be very angry. Somebody had deeply hurt his family, and he was so angry and so eat up that it was literally destroying his joy, his peace. It was impacting his relationships, and the whole forgiveness thing, he was choking on it. So we met numerous times. We progressed through some steps of forgiveness. But one of the things I pointed out to him, and I says, you think about this, that means every single day, the rest of your life, you're going to have to, I told him, as you reach for the doorknob of your house to go outside, you're going to ask yourself, am I going to submit? Am I going to lay this at the feet of Jesus? Am I going to forgive today? Or am I going to get off that altar, no longer be a living sacrifice? Am I going to assert my righteous indignation? Am I going to be angry today and allow this unforgiveness to reside in my heart today? I said, every single day you reach for the doorknob, I want you to pause and say, I'm going to forgive today. Today I am choosing to forgive. Why? I told him, I said, it's not like you're being weak. I said, what you're doing is you do this, you're saying, God, you know what's right, you know what's best in the situation, and I'm at a place where I can release this to you. I'm going to give this to you so that whatever's going to happen in this other person's life today, it is not my burden to bear. Because forgiveness between me and God, just the two of us. I want to be at peace with God, and I am not going to allow my anger, my bitterness, this harsh thing I got going to come between me and my walk with God. But say, God, you are God, and I am not God, and I'm letting it go. And that, be anxious for nothing. Why? Because we come to Jesus. We go anywhere else, we're going to end up packing that. As a matter of fact, if you're not careful where you go, whoever you're talking to may be pouring fuel on the fire of your anger and making it worse. Jesus said, listen, you come to me, be anxious for nothing, and take it in prayer. Come to me humbly in prayer. Lay it at my feet. Trust me to be God and that I will do what is best. And you will find that liberating. You'll find freedom and peace. The peace of God that passes all understanding. That is how you experience it.